Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to our conversation for quite some time. And so I can't wait to get into it. As you know, we share like this concept of shifting, and our
Mm.
color template seems to agree. We like the color orange, and I know a lot of other things. So yeah, I can't
Yeah,
wait to dive in and chat with you.
absolutely. Likewise, likewise. So give my audience a little bit of a context about kind of who you are and your story before we start going into the different aspects of your life and what you're up to today.
Yeah. So grew up in upstate New York, went to school in Virginia, landed in DC, and now I call home outside of New York City in New Jersey. I'm a proud papa of two wonderful girls. I can't believe that they're already 22 and 25 because I don't think I've really aged that much, but they've grown up. It's pretty wild to see them as women out there in the world making a difference. And come this Sunday, my wife and I will be married 29 years. And
Wow.
you might know this because you're in the DC area. We met in a personal ad in the city paper way back when, before Match.com was a thing, or eHarmony or Tinder and all that stuff like that. So we have a big weekend ahead, 29 years of marriage,
Wow.
which is pretty cool. And so part of my story is one of those classic letting go, dying, rebirth stories. I call it my last bad day. I got hit head on by a Ford Explorer when I was riding my bike. I've been a lifelong avid cyclist, and I brought my bike out for one of these corporate offsites, these team building sessions that I know you do a lot of work with, working with great corporations. I brought my bike out, other people brought golf clubs out. And one morning in 2001, I was coming around a bend and a Ford Explorer crossed fully into my lane and hit me head on. And to make a long story relatively short, I broke a whole bunch of everything. The doctors have no idea how I survived. They told my wife, had I been 10 years older or not in shape, I certainly would have passed before I got to the hospital. And they painted a pretty grim picture of my life ahead. They said, like, listen, you're probably going to walk with difficulty, give up on the idea of ever riding your bike again. You're going to have a lot of surgeries, a lot of rehab, a lot of pain and suffering. And in that moment, I was like, my whole world was turned upside down and shaken violently because I had my identity. I was a marketing executive for a healthcare company, proud papa, loving husband, athlete, active. And then I was like, well, who am I going to become? If
Hmm.
I can't be who I was, that, I had so much comfort in all those titles and labels and really doing, like, it was classic. You meet a lot of people like me back then who are like, we're doing and we're hustling and climbing the corporate ladder and going after external merit badges and all that jazz. And that's what I thought the script of life was. And, I had to really come to a aha moment when I realized that I could live life differently. I can choose my labels, and really I found mindfulness through my recovery. I knew I had to slow everything down, find my breath as a way to heal my mind, to heal my body, because I really wanted to leave the hospital. I just wanted to feel normal again, and use the restroom by myself or take a shower without any help. I just
Hmm.
thought, like, through the whole accident, I lost so much of my dignity. And I really thought mindfulness way back then, 2001, was a bunch of woo woo stuff. I didn't want to tell anyone about it, but I was desperate. I had to try almost anything so I could get out of the hospital and back to life. And that's sort of where the story picks up. It's totally crazy moment that happens to too many people. And then you get to decide how you're going to respond to it versus react.
Mm. That's definitely one thing to consider, respond to versus react. That's a very good point. I want to talk more about that. But before we dig deeper, just for further context, so how long were you actually in recovery for? Like how long were you in the hospital? How did that process take?
Yeah, so I was in the hospital for close to 4 months. I went to 3 different hospitals for different surgeries. So initially it was out in New Mexico. They flew me back to New Jersey. They're like, "We're gonna fly you back in an air ambulance. It's gonna be a Lear jet." And I was like, "Oh, like rock
Mm.
star." Like I thought it was like a rock star thing. It was so far from rock star quality. It was, basically shoved me in on my stretcher. And so I went to one hospital, then subsequent to another one. But then because I really wanted to get home, and I probably went home earlier than I should have, because I still was struggling with just moving around in my basic activities of daily living. But I wanted to get home. I wanted to sleep in my own bed and
Mm.
smell the smells of home. So that what happened then is I had every day outpatient therapy. So because I still needed a whole bunch of occupational and physical therapy, and also just sort of talk therapy, right? Because this
Mhm.
was a lot of physical injuries, but also a lot of emotional trauma too, emotional harm. So I had to go through a lot. So I also had to prepare for a lot more surgery. So in total, I've had about 13 different surgeries
Mm.
and way too many hours of rehab to count. And I really sort of attacked rehab, like working out in a training plan. So when I wasn't doing rehab supervised by a professional physical therapist, I was doing my own thing at home because I was just so eager to, one part of my DNA to get after things, to, get better and make things happen. But again, I felt through that accident, I was not at first, but over time, I thought, okay, I was really given a gift to live life differently. And once you have that big aha, this through the work you do, you want to step into it. You want to take the most of it and make the most of it. You don't want that window to close. So I was pretty aggressive with how I approached my rehab and just my medical care in general.
Mm. And so at that time, I'm sure it was so difficult to go. I mean, first of all, I can't even imagine how difficult it was, but I'm sure you've had your days where the worst of your mind took over. So what was it? Do you remember if there was like a pivot moment when you decided to just, because you could have gone either way, right? And it probably would have impacted your recovery as well. So, and at some point you were like, no, I'm gonna just make the best out of whatever this is. But do you remember like what was it? That kind of pushed you? Was there like a moment when you're like I need to push through this?
Yeah, there was a couple moments that really are remarkable. One was a mentor of mine said, "Hey, you know what? You're labeling yourself as a victim, and no one's going to blame you because something horrific happened to you.
Mm.
You're in this hospital and you're in a lot of pain. But everything is neutral, Michael, until you label it." And at first,
Mm.
I was like, "Huh? Like, is that some like Jedi Yoda thing?"
Mm.
And he repeated it, and I was like, "Okay." At first, I didn't buy into it, but then I realized, and it does sort of tie back into what Viktor Frankl wrote in Man's Search for Meaning, that there's a space between the stimulus and your response. So there's some neutrality to life.
Mm.
And we're rushing through life so fast nowadays, and even back in 2001, we want to label things as good, bad, right, wrong, whatever. We're not giving anything any space. So he said there's some space, and in that space you can come up with new labels. You can see yourself differently, that maybe this happened for you and not to you. And
Mm.
so that was a moment, but it wasn't a switch to say, oh, now I see the light, now I'm going to go forward. It was just a data point. Then you add some of the other things, like the irritation of and frustration about being in the hospital, and this notion that I had, because I was an athlete for so long, that your breath is important. So, slowing things down, connecting with the breath on an intellectual basis was something that was also another data point. And I knew like things were overwhelming in my mind. And I thought, okay, if I can just chunk this down, into bite-sized pieces, as my mom would say when I would try to eat too much all at once, she would be like, Michael, bite-size, smaller bites. So it was a combination of a lot of different things and a lot of different emotions. It wasn't just one thing or one emotion. And then I was like, okay, all right, you have an opportunity here. You don't have to play the victim. You can, as corny as this sounds, you can be the victor. This is a moment of resilience, of grit and tenacity, and you can step into it. And I've always loved the underdog story, like that, that come from behind. And I'm like, all right, this is your underdog story. No one is predicting anything good for you, except you should be lucky. You should just be grateful that you're alive. That was the overall message. Be
Mm,
grateful for your life. Be grateful that you survived this. Lower your expectations, right? That was the overall message. And I was like, you know what? That's not good enough. So I'm going to play the underdog. So everyone's going to discount me. And it wasn't a chip on my shoulder, but it was like, I am going to lean into this. I have an opportunity to grow as a human, as a partner, as a father, as an athlete. And I sort of took that on. And so it was step by step, day by day, not linear, right? Some
mm,
days were amazing, and other days were just horrible. They were so tough. But I just decided I was going to stay in it. So have the discipline to stay in it day by day and try to make little progress, like the whole concept of Kaizen, is like little progress, 1 degree of improvement over the course of time. So not taking big chunks, but just small steps. I had faith that if I could do that, I could look back and see how much I had grown.
mm. You know what's interesting is when I speak with guests on my podcast and whether they've had some kind of life changing stories, it always comes to mind. And something I just started to mention to you before we started recording is that it's so hard for us to pause and to take this moment unless something happens. Like that's what it seems to for many of us, not everybody. Some people are more disciplined than that, but I was just telling my boyfriend the other day, I've been sick for the last couple of days and now I'm like on the recovery, etc. But I had to stop because I just couldn't do anything. And I had time to just think and to be with myself and to just be. Versus my personality is very much go, 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 go. And the last month particular has been very much like running, which is probably why I got sick, because my immune system was probably down from all the things I was doing. But it's always surprising to me how, it's like we know the benefit of it theoretically, maybe, but then it's so hard for so many of us, especially in this world where we're continuously distracted, we're continuously stimulated, consuming. So, after your experience, how has that changed for you? And, like, I guess, how can we better, meditation wise, for example, how can we better, I don't know, be more proactive about taking a moment, even if we know it's good for us, but it's like, oh, well, I'll do it tomorrow. And then we don't.
Yeah, such a wonderful question. I think ultimately our body will whisper to us before it screams at us. And I don't think a lot of people have asked me, like, well, do you have to go through something like you went through, Michael, to, change? And I I don't think you do. I think if you can tune into what your body is sharing with you or other people who have gone through things, there's plenty of stories, stories like mine, other shifts that people have made. So those are really great teaching moments to say, hey, listen, well, okay, that person went through that. What's my body sharing with me right now? Do I need to slow down? And so that's the first question. Like, are there ways I can slow down or particular areas of my life where I can just slow down a bit and take care of myself and make change? Again, just the slightest change, just that 1 degree of change. I think that opportunity exists for all of us almost every day. Then the resistance comes into play. Like, so Stephen Pressfield talks about the resistance when it comes to your creative work, right? But that resistance of like, okay, intellectually, I know slowing down is probably good and it will help me get faster and it will help me, prevent burnout. So I'm not sick, but everyone seems to be rushing. So we have this fear of missing out or this FOPO, this fear of other people's opinions. Like, why are you slow when I'm rushing? Like, you should be
Mhm.
rushing around like I am. And so it's this like churn, this hamster wheel stuff that we get adrenaline and we're like, oh, we gotta go, we gotta go, we gotta go.
Mm,
And it really does take like this faith, this belief that no, I'm going to listen to my body, I'm going to listen to my heart, and I'm just going to take a moment. I'm not going to stop completely. So when I developed pause, breathe, reflect, I didn't say stop, because I too, like, I like to get stuff done. And so when I came up with these moments as a way to like begin my mindfulness practice in my wheelchair in the hospital, I didn't call them a stop. It was just a pause
mm,
and come back to my breath that I knew from being an athlete. Because again, I wasn't a mindfulness teacher back then in 2001. And that moment of reflection was key. That's the key piece. I think people can pause all day long. We pause at traffic lights and, you know, online and in line and all that jazz. We can breathe. But that moment of reflection to say, okay, how do you want to show up? How do you want to meet life? What kind of ripple do you want to put out there? Um, in that moment of reflection, we can practice gratitude. Like, what am I grateful for in this moment? So the reflection piece of my practice was essential because it helped me live more intentionally. And I decided, like, I'm going to be that person when everyone else is rushing around. I'm going to be that person that's going to take a break, pause just for a minute, slow my breath, reflect, and then go forward. Because now I know after 20 plus years that that actually helps me go faster and it helps me get more things done with higher quality. But in the beginning, it took a lot of faith and belief that, okay, we're going to do that. It was sort of like for me, it was like a Ted Lasso moment before we knew Ted Lasso was going to come.
mm. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the kind of moments to pause throughout our day, whether it's sitting at the light and etc. The other day I was watching something on social media, and I forget the gentleman's name, but he was saying that even when we are going into a coffee shop or sitting at a red light or doing any of these kind of like daily things, we're in our phones, like we're always like, or we're consuming or we're listening to something. And that was one of my reflection points the last few days, as well as I've decided to minimize how much I'm listening to podcasts on my walks. I love my podcasts, like not my podcast, but other people's podcasts that I listen to. So I love listening to podcasts on my walks, but then I've recognized that I don't feel the nature around me. And that to me is like a moment of relaxation. So I started doing that. And I'm also going to kind of hopefully adjust when I am stopping at red lights, because I am that person who's like checking her phone at a red light. Or when I go in a coffee shop, my face is on my phone. And he said, we're so bothered, we're spending so much time consuming that we're not recognizing these moments in life. And I think it's very relevant to also being able to just reflect for a moment and observe where we are in that space with the people around us, whether we're alone again or with people. So it's again, like this conversation is so timely because I've just went through it. Because I was, when you're sick, you're like, oh gosh, like, I have all this time, like, and you have time to think, and you're like, how did I get here? So it's very interesting, and it's it's nice that we're having this conversation. You're further encouraging me to, and I'm sure my audience as well, to kind of pause. Again, very timely conversation.
That's cool. Well, I'm with you. Like when I ride my bike, I rode my bike across the country last year, and
Wow.
a lot of people ask me like, what did you listen to? Like you were all by yourself, and for the most part, I said I didn't listen to anything. Much like you and your walk. You want to feel nature. We are nature. You want to hear it. You want to feel it. You want to smell it. You want to taste it. And for me, I did some of the roads were gravel roads, and there's something about the sound of a bike going across gravel, that crunchiness.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I did listen to some podcasts, I did listen to some music at the tail end of each day because I needed a little mojo to finish sometimes. But for the most part, I just wanted to like hear and feel and see and sort of taste and smell like my surroundings. And the way I develop my app is that I have a whole bunch of meditations because they're over indexed. The meditations are over indexed on shorter practices because my app was built for busy people.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a meditation, it's 1 minute when you're standing in line at the coffee shop,
Mm-hmm.
or at a traffic light, or 1 minute before your next meeting, or when you're riding the escalator or elevator. So I try to take a whole bunch of these micro moments that we blow through, that we just habitually just grab our phones and start scrolling, and try to help people see that those can be mindful moments. Because I have a whole bunch of people that come to me, you work with busy people all the time, who say, listen, I can't wake up 10 minutes earlier than I'm already waking up. So my morning routine is busy. I have a lot to do. I have a morning ritual, but I got kids to put into school. I got email to crank out before my next meeting. Now I'm going back into the office from time to time. So I don't have 10 minutes, Michael, to meditate in the morning. My head's
Mm-hmm.
just not there. And I say to that, cool, I'm not going to break down your calendar, and I'm not
Mm-hmm.
going to tell you to wake up 10 minutes earlier, but I will invite you to find 10 moments throughout the day where you have a minute
Mm-hmm.
to slow down, come back to your breath, and be intentional about how you want to show up
Mm-hmm.
next. So I like to think I'm getting my 10 minutes from people in 1 minute increments. And I think that's, in a lot of ways, I think that's a healthier way to practice mindfulness. Too many people I know have a practice in the morning, but then they don't take that practice off their chair or cushion and weave it into the day.
Mm-hmm.
When we live mindfully, we want to try to live mindfully throughout the day. So taking these micro breaks is a good reminder to say, hey, okay, what am I feeling in the body? Do I feel a little, triggered, or, or is the adrenaline going? Do I want it to be going? And is this a moment to slow it down just a bit and really get my head on straight?
Mm-hmm. And when you started meditating, how did you start? A lot of people are like, oh, I'm sure when you started, maybe you didn't start off like with like full on. So how did you start? Was there any resistance in that? Like, how did you get up to, get to a point where you're actually creating an app, or you created an app for meditation?
Yeah, so I started, the very first practice was in the hospital. I did a box breathing pattern, which is a simple inhale for a count of 4 or 5. You hold for 4 or 5, exhale for 4 or 5, and then hold for 4 or 5. So you make a box or a rectangle if the pattern's just a little bit different. And that's all I did. So I knew that breathwork pattern from my days as an athlete. I think it also comes from the Navy SEALs. I think they use it too to calm down before a mission.
Mm,
So that's what I did to start. I did one of those in the morning for about 5 minutes. It felt good. The day was productive, so I did it. I did it again the next day, and then I just kept on doing it. And then I amped up the frequency. So I did it like midday. I did it right before bed. And so that was the start. And then I found John Kabat-Zinn's mindfulness-based stress reduction. And he really brought the Eastern practice of mindfulness to the West, and it got embedded into the University of Massachusetts Medical Center as a way to help with anxiety and pain and a whole bunch of other different conditions. And so with my background in healthcare, I was like, oh, wow, like mindfulness is medicine. Like I can use this practice to help deal with the pain I was feeling and some of the other things I was dealing with. And so that practice becomes 45 minutes a day. And that's what I'm formally trained in, MBSR, mindfulness based stress reduction.
mhm,
So the practice is a long practice, but a lot of the people that I would work with corporately, I meet and talk to today, they're having difficulty just finding 10 minutes. So when I say, oh, yeah, it's 45 minutes, they're like, no go. I can't do 45 minutes a day. That's super long. I can't even work out for 45 minutes a day.
mm,
And that's when I decided, because there's really no great research on what the proper length is and how frequently you should do it. So from a proper dose, if you will, of
mhm,
mindfulness, we don't have really good research yet. So that's why I want to try to meet people where they're at. Say, okay, I accept that you're busy. I'm not going to give you some clever thing. If you don't have, 10 minutes, you probably should do 20 minutes. I just want to meet you where you're at and help you stress less 1 minute at a time. And then that 1 minute, if you do it just 1 minute each day, you can string together a whole bunch of days and you can
Mm-hmm.
start to form a really healthy habit. And then maybe from there, you make that longer. So it becomes 2 minutes, or you do it a little bit more frequently in the day. So many people that come into pause, breathe, reflect now practice longer, but they didn't start off with a 20, 30-minute practice each day. They built up to that over time.
Mm. I really love that concept of just like this 1 minute. I'm a huge fan of just like small habits and daily habits. And I think consistency is key. So the easier you can make it. So I think it's super, super good. Actually, the one of my kind of taglines for the podcast is like 1% better each day. So I really believe in that incremental kind of shifts and change and whatever you're trying to achieve. So I love that concept. And I think it's the one that makes it easy for people to stick with. So I love that. I'm curious also after your experience, how long did it take you to say, okay, I really want to do this, I want to develop this app, I want to go towards that route of actually educating people about this and speaking about this, etc. Did you go back to your corporate job after you recovered? Like how did that journey turn out?
Yeah, it took about 20 years, 20-year
Mm-hmm.
journey. So it's a long journey. What I did when I came out of the hospital, I did go back to my corporate life, but I went back to that corporate life with a completely different narrative in a new script on how I was going to approach work and my life. And I had mindfulness in my back pocket, but I told no one, not a soul, I was doing this because I was the head of sales and marketing. And this is early 2000s, right? So I didn't want anyone to judge me like, hey, you know what? He's already broken. He's already been through this big accident. Now he's got a screw loose. He's doing this mindfulness thing. It's a little soft and wooey. So I already knew that people were sort of, or at least I thought that was the story, that people were looking at me as a broken commodity, a broken resource. Because I was still struggling in the early days to get around and more surgeries. I didn't want to give anyone any more fuel to say, hey, maybe he's lost it. Maybe this accident's really pushed him back. So I kept the mindfulness thing a secret, but that was my secret sauce. So I kept on doing it. It helped me step into my new narrative, my new game plan. And then I left my corporate life at the end of 2014, beginning of 15. And then as a coach, I started writing about it more, but I still wasn't teaching classes yet. I wasn't teaching meditation. I was just recommending people, recommending to people to step into a mindful way of living. Then the pandemic hit, and I was like, whoa, well, the universe has just given us an invite to mindfully live. You know, there's been a ton of loss, clearly, and a lot of grief, and we still haven't fully processed it, in my opinion. Like, we still have things to work through and understand. But I do think it was a moment that happened for us to say, hey, how do you guys and gals want to be living? How do you want to show up for the planet, for each other? I think this is still some of the work that's in front of us because we seem to want to go back to normal. But I do think it's this open door to say, why don't you mindfully live? It's better for the planet, it's better for your overall health. You can get more things done that truly matter. So there's an app called Clubhouse that came out. You
Mm-hmm.
might have heard of it.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, you know what? It seemed like there's a whole bunch of people who we were all isolated and people were going through a lot. I started doing leading mini practices there. And then we had a following in a matter of months of like 10,000 people. And so I was like, all right, sort of proof of concept.
Mm-hmm.
I decided from there, as I was riding my bike across the country, why am I on Clubhouse? Why am I doing this on someone else's property, if you will? Let's just create our own app. And I knew nothing about creating an app. I probably still know very little, but I've learned already a whole bunch. But I thought I just want to create my own space, our own brave space for people to practice mindfulness in the pause, breathe, reflect way. And there's a really cool thing about our approach to mindfulness in this app is that I lead live practices each day through the week, because I think we are still thirsty for belonging. We want to hang with like-hearted people. We can have space for different like-mindedness, but we want to be with like-hearted people. We want to be in community. And being in real life is ideal, but we have people all across the world that have the app. So being on Zoom is the next best thing. And there's something really wonderful about coming in and building connection and building friendship. And no app is really doing it in the way that we're doing it. So for me, I didn't want to just have the app be you're by yourself in your apartment listening to a meditation. I wanted to at least give you an opportunity to come into community and make your practice a little bit different. So yeah, each day during the week we do a live practice.
Yeah, I agree. That sense of community, and just even if it's voice, right? Like even if it's just have that connection with others is very, very important. All meditation is great, but I do like that community feel. Just that, yeah, that touch with other people, especially during the time when we're going through the pandemic. Oh my goodness. That's really interesting. And quick question, I wanted to back up just a little bit. How long did it take you to get back on your bike? I'm curious.
13 months. So,
Okay.
and I was pushed into it by my physical therapist. She was pushing my buttons during one therapy session, and she said, "Hey, listen, you can't come back for rehab until you try to get on your bike outside." And I was not having it. I was like, "I'm the patient. I can come back. I have health care. You have to treat me." She was like, "I'm not treating you until you try to get back on your bike." I was hesitating, and it wasn't because I was nervous about being in traffic again. What I knew is that if I got back on the bike would tell me how far I still had to go to be normal. It was almost, sometimes when you're trying to lose weight, the jeans are fitting a little bit better, and you think, oh yeah, I've lost weight, and you don't want to get on the scale because the scale is going to really tell you if you've lost weight or not, or maybe the jeans just fit better because you haven't washed them in a couple weeks, they're looser. That's what I was worried about. I knew I was making progress, but I also knew like, gosh, I have so much more to go to get
Mm,
back to how I used to ride my bike. And I did not want to see that. It was like putting the mirror up in front of me. And she knew that. And I think it's important to have people in your life that know how to challenge you in a safe, compassionate way, know how to push your buttons. And she did that for me. And so, I fought it. I grumbled. I complained to my wife. And then the next day, we went to an industrial park and I got back on the bike and I was all wobbly because my legs were of different lengths back then. And it was very slow, but it was pretty wonderful to, okay, this is what it feels like. I know this. My body knows this.
mm,
And I did a short ride and then I went on the road. So the first bit of this was in a closed off industrial park. It was the weekend, so there was no traffic. And then I went onto this road that I had ridden thousands of times before. And as soon as I got on it, a big Ford Expedition
mm,
was flying up behind me. So I got hit by an Explorer, but the Expedition is
mm-hmm.
the bigger version. And I was like, oh my God, universe, you got to be kidding me. Like,
Oh,
and it was also white. And the Ford Explorer that hit me was white. And I was like, oh boy. So I grabbed onto the handlebars, I held my breath, and then it passed me and I let my breath out and I eased my grip and I was like, okay, I can do this. Like I can do hard things. And then from there to your philosophy, like small steps, I was like, okay, I'm just going to ride a little bit further today. I'm going to try to ride a little bit faster today.
mm,
So I would try to ride with some of the group rides and, my philosophy was like, just try to make it to this town or make it to this landmark. And I would, and then eventually they would leave me behind because they're faster. But I just kept on chipping away at it and chipping away at it. And soon enough, I was back riding my bike, and eventually I got back to racing. And as I just mentioned, rode my bike across the country. Last year, we averaged about close to 95 miles a day. So we've
Wow,
made we've made a pretty good we've made a pretty good comeback.
that's phenomenal. How long did it take you?
41 days of riding
Hmm.
and 45 days in total. We went from Astoria, Oregon, and we
Hmm.
finished up in Washington, D.C. So
Wow.
we took the C&O Canal into DC through Georgetown, and yeah, finished up right at the Lincoln Memorial, and had a whole bunch of people waiting for me. And it was, yeah, a great event. My wife drove the RV, and we had our two dogs as co-pilots, and we saw the country, and we shared this experience that we hope will last us a lifetime.
That's beautiful. So before I ask you my last question that I ask all my guests, talk to us a little bit about where do you hang out on social media? Where can people download the meditation app and your books and everything else that you have out there?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So the Apple Store and Google Play both have the app. All people have to do is type in pause, breathe, reflect. And once they get it, you initially just like feel a sense of calm. You just get to down regulate all the stress and slow down. So, but that's available on the Apple Store and Google Play. My website is pausebreathereflect.com. Also, that's Instagram. On LinkedIn, if you just type in my name, Michael O'Brien, there'll be a whole bunch of people, but hopefully you'll be able to find me. If you put in like meditation teacher or um, other ways to enhance the search, I'm sure you'll be able to find me. But if you go to my website, you'll find the hot link that will take you there.
And I'll make sure to share all of that in the show notes as well. As you're talking, I'm just thinking how phenomenal it is, the ability of our bodies to bounce back if the mind is with it, you know. It's just phenomenal that how much, control we do have, and even on the physical aspects, if we would just put our minds to it and chip away at it one day at a time. I'm always just completely amazed by individuals like you. So it always reminds me of how resilient we are, and it really starts with our mindset.
It really it does, and thank you for that. I think the body's amazing. The mind is amazing. If we give ourselves some time and we put the right type of nutrition into our bodies, the body finds a way to heal. I will also say, in some cases it doesn't, right? And so, it's hard to understand like who makes progress like I've made, and maybe some other person would say, well, I did what you did, and I fed myself well and the whole thing, but I didn't get better.
Mm,
So those stories happen too, but I do believe overall in the potential of the body when we put the right things in it. We consume the right food and drink, and also messages, and we surround ourselves with like-hearted people who want to bring out the best in us, and we want to bring out the best in them. Like all those factors together, plus patience and time, I think the body really does want to get back to a healing state.
mm,
But it does require, I think, a different way of living in order for the body to be healed. So I had fractures that needed to be healed, but I also had emotional trauma that needed to be healed. And
mm,
that takes time, and it takes dedication and a different way of showing up for yourself so you can show up for other people in a different way.
mm. No, absolutely. So my last question for you is, what is one question you wish people would ask themselves more often?
Oh, this is a good one. I knew you were coming with this. So I love this question. I would say, what is called for now? So,
What is
which is a
called for now?
classic, yeah, which is a classic mindfulness question. What is called for now? So that's a question to ask in this moment of reflection. You pause, you take a breath. What is called for now? So in essence, how do I wish to show up? What's
Mm,
needed? Like what kind of ripple do I want to put out into the world? So the answer to the question is a thoughtful answer. It gives someone a way to intentionally live. And I think if we intentionally live instead of being reactive, we can really respond to our moments and make connections with ourselves and others that help us do amazing things and hopefully help us heal as a country and help us heal as a planet. So yeah, what is called for now? And, you know, and sometimes what's called for now is I want to be unhappy. I want to be sad. I want to be angry. I want to be irritated or at least feel those emotions as opposed to personalizing them. So
Mm-hmm.
right now, I want to feel anger because I'm terrified by gun violence and I can't believe we're not doing something about it. Or I want to feel sad because I lost someone that I love. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
it can be that, so, but you're sitting with your emotions, you're not resisting them, you're being with them. So a lot of times that question will lead to how do you wish to be? And I think if we can do more of that across the planet, we can have a more peaceful, loving world and do some really incredible things. So that's what I hope people
Yeah.
ask themselves.
I like that. I like that. Michael, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your story. I look forward to following your content, utilizing your app, and staying in touch with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I love what you're putting out into the world. And yeah, I'm really glad we got the chance to connect today. And hopefully your listeners got a pearl or two that they can use in their lives.